Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We're Spark Partners. We're here every week to discuss all things trends, all things business, and we offer some unconventional wisdom to help you grow your business. And I think on today's podcast, Adam, we're going to go in a little bit different direction. I'm going to try to speak some French here and we'll likely butcher it, but it's a phrase that I think is very relevant to our discussion today. And it's plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, which is my butchering of the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I want to talk about some of these companies in particular over the past year that have made, and actually even beyond that have made some really bad decisions. And we keep on making these bad decisions as these big companies are surfacing to the top like a beached whale. And so I want to talk about that, Adam. And, you know, for our small and medium-sized business owners, this can be a really good way to look at your business from a case study, of course, of a giant company, looking at how does that map down to your company. So let's start off that conversation with looking at some of these companies that have made bad decisions, in particular this year.
Yeah, so we've talked about some of these in the last few weeks. I hope some of our listeners remember the discussions about Boeing. Remember Boeing? And Here was this company, great commercial airline manufacturer, airframer. They look at the trouble they're in, primarily because why? They got focused on earnings instead of focusing on how to grow their business. We recently had the conversation about Intel. And here we're in the world of artificial intelligence, and Intel, Intel Inside, they were the microprocessor kings for 25 years. They dominated, but when it came time to change to go to a different kind of processor that would support artificial intelligence, as we discussed, they made the mistake not to go that direction. And you can say, well, how were they to know? And it's sort of like, well, if you pay attention to trends and you keep watching what the marketplace is doing, you would have noted that, for example, PC sales were not going up, but gaming sales were skyrocketing and people wanted to buy the gaming platforms. And so the marketplace had shifted from traditional processing to this neural processing methodology. So what we're getting at here is that I want to make it clear. This is the same problem that I discovered back in the 1990s when I started doing the research for my book, Create Marketplace Disruption, How to Stay Ahead of the Competition. And way back then, I was just really mesmerized trying to understand how could a company like Xerox fail? You remember Xerox?
Right.
We didn't just have photocopiers on every floor. We had Xerox machines on every floor. They were one of the most successful sales companies ever. And they're gone, right? They were gone practically by the year 2000. Then let's take a look at, let's turn the page and go to somebody like, let's see.
Walgreens. How about Walgreens?
There you go. Walgreens. Yeah. What happened at Walgreens? Well, we talked about that recently, that what they did was they had always added to their business, doing more things, being a leader. But then as the pharmaceutical industry was shifting to different payment methods, the insurance industry was shifting, Obamacare had come along and changed some rules. The government was changing rules with Medicare. They made the mistake of, instead of going forward like they'd always done over time, they looked at the Theranos mistake they made and they said, oh, well, you know what? We're going to go back to our core and we're going to focus on drugs and we're going to focus the store on drugs. And now they're almost out of business, right? They're almost gone. And so it's like Kodak, here Kodak invented the digital camera, but they're not even hardly in existence anymore. They invented amateur photography. And then they invent the digital camera. Why? How can you blow it? How could you make that mistake? You look at it in retrospect. And then, so the purpose of my research, what I focused on when I wrote the book was I started to develop this sense that people that were looking and saying, well, Kodak made this mistake. And, I'd go really deep into what Kodak talked about. Or Xerox made this mistake really deep. Or another one I featured in the book was Multgraphics, who made printing equipment. And nobody's ever heard of them at this point in time now because there's no small printing presses around anymore. But anyway, how could these companies have leading edge ideas, have innovations, and how could they fail? And I started to see that there was a systematic problem. And that's the point of this podcast. The point of this podcast is to say that if we're not careful, if we do what we think is right or what is the easy thing to do, often it'll get you into big trouble. And so there is a systematic problem with how businesses operate. And that is two pieces to it. One, they don't pay attention to trends. They're looking internally at how to better manage their business, how to improve the existing products, and not looking enough at customers, new technologies, regulatory change, how things are changes in the world. They're not paying enough attention to the outside world. They're too busy running the business as it exists today. And the second thing is putting too much attention on earnings and not enough attention on trying to grow your revenues by getting into new businesses, right? So
Right.
In our podcast about Boeing, for example, we made hay out of the fact that the earnings folk, when they shifted from how to make better airplanes to how to make cheaper airplanes, they got themselves into a bunch of trouble. So Intel, when it wouldn't shift to the new type of processors, they got themselves in trouble. So the idea is that we're seeing companies today make the same mistakes that companies were making in the 1990s and before, 1980s and 1990s. They're systematically making the same errors. And often they think they're doing the best practices. And I'm running my business as best I can. If I take care of the pennies and nickels and dimes, then the dollars will take care of themselves. If I focus on my core customers, my core technology, that will be my road to riches. When in fact, it's the road to ruin. And most recently, we had Red Lobster, right? So just like what the old companies I've been talking about, the Kodaks of the world, today it's the same thing. And your Boeing, Intel, the Walgreens, your Red Lobster. Again, Red Lobster was a place that people went to eat 25 years ago. It's actually a 40-year-old chain. A guy named Darden created it. He was one of the first to try to have a string of fish restaurants. Didn't even sell lobsters, just like the name Red Lobster. And they did. They got a lot of people to eat seafood that hadn't eaten it before. And they expanded it, but they never changed, right? They didn't keep up with the times. They didn't improve their menu. They didn't perhaps think about whole different types, categories of food to eat. They didn't update the restaurants themselves. They didn't do the things they needed to do to bring in new customers. And so as a result, what happened was they got stale and eventually they couldn't grow and they weren't making money. And then they got bought by their supplier, a company out of Thailand that was supplying them with the fish they bought. They basically bought them as a way to keep the sales going. Now they've given up and they walked away. And so, Red Lobster is going to be no more. It's going into bankruptcy. They wouldn't give up what they had in order to become what they could be. And now the most recent one is Big Lots. Here's a company, Big Lots, been around for several years. A lot of people went and shopped there. They are no more. Filed bankruptcy. They're going to sell off their assets. They're calling it quits. What did they do? Well, they were in a business for a while that was successful, competing with Dollar General and General Dollar Store and those type of companies, Dollar Tree. And it was the idea of sell a lot of inexpensive products. And, for boomers, that was a big thing. I'm a boomer generation. And a lot of us looked at our parents, and if our parents had one car, most of us, one car in the family. And as we got older, what we started saying, if my parents had one car, I want to have two. If my parents had a 2-bedroom house, I want a 3-bedroom house. If they had 1 bathroom, I want 2 bathrooms. We wanted more. And so SS Kresge came out with Kmart, and we see Woolworths, and then we see Ben Franklin stores become Walmart, and we start seeing that, we can get more stuff. And that's what the dollar stores are about, more stuff, more inexpensive stuff. But unfortunately, that's the competition. The competition at that bottom was really intense, a lot of people, and the market shifted. Because if you look at people your age, Manny, and younger, it's not so much about, I just want stuff. It's give me good stuff, Instead of, you look around at ladies that are carrying a purse. Most of them don't carry just some old purse. I mean, they look at a purse with a brand on it, right? It's a Gucci or a Prada or a Coach or some sort of a brand, and they paid a premium for that. They'd rather have something nice and have one or two than have a whole bunch of things that aren't so nice or low quality. Same thing with, how much house do I have? Do I need to have a big house, bigger than my parents' house? Or would I be better off to have a smaller house, have some nice things in it, and maybe go on a big vacation once a year that my parents never got to do? Go to Switzerland or go do something that my parents never got to do. So the trend shifted, right? And what people wanted to buy, how they wanted to spend their money shifted, but Big Lots didn't. It was still selling junky products at a low price that weren't going to last very long. That market just simply got smaller, people buying less stuff, and they didn't do anything about it. And so this is the trend that we get into, spending time trying to do more of what we've always done as a business, trying to focus on our business, trying to cut costs in our business, trying to improve the more, better, faster, cheaper elements of our business. Well, instead of looking outside and saying, wait a minute, I'm probably not going to be able to save my way to prosperity. I'm going to have to figure out a way to sell more stuff. And to sell more stuff, I've got to look outside. And so we got to spend more time looking outside and less time looking at yourself, and more time figuring out how you're going to grow your revenue. So that's and with these big companies, they can hide it, right? Then they can go along without growing so much, and they can survive longer. And so you don't see their mistakes for years. Like we talked about Intel mistakes with not buying into OpenAI, for example. But for small and mid-sized companies, you don't have that leeway.
Yeah.
You mess up, you can be gone in a hurry, right?
Yeah, I have maybe an interesting new perspective on these big case studies. And, these companies, small companies that say, well, what does it matter if Red Lobster is still around? What does it matter if Big Lots is still around for me? I mean, these things they're not my business. I'm in the construction business, or I have a flooring business or whatever. And the real magic is to recognize that the same trends that are causing the market to shift and for these companies to be on the ropes is the same trends that you're in if you're in the flooring business, or if you've got a roofing business, or if you've got a bakery, or if you've got a small engineering company. It's the same damn trends. And that's why I think this podcast has so much value, is because by looking at these other companies and how they may have failed or how they may have succeeded, you can use that in your own business to then make those decisions. So I'm going to throw a bomb into this conversation, Adam. And it's a bit of a subject that I know will light a fire. Is I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and they mentioned how excited they were to read the book Good to Great. and I paused, and I just let them tell me why it was exciting for them and why they wanted to read it. And I said, if you look at those companies of the list that he put in there, Jim Collins, only maybe one or two are still really relevant. And so I wanted to use that because that was a big deal 20 years ago, right? It was this book that came out, and maybe it was more like 30 years ago, and he really made a big case for it. They were teaching in business schools. You still see it. If I go to a buddy of mine's office, it'll be sitting there, that red book in the corner. So let's talk about that and why that really didn't hit the mark.
Yeah, well, the first book that Collins wrote was Built to Last, and then after that, he followed it up with Good to Great. And you're right. Each one focuses on a handful of companies, a set of companies, and you can go see which ones they are. And what you'll discover is that many of them aren't even in business anymore. And as you said, almost none of them even are relevant anymore. And Good to Great, for example, so Built to Last is supposed to be, if you build your company this way, you'll last forever and you'll make a ton of money. And about 80% of those aren't even around anymore. Then in Good to Great, his number one company, the company that was just so good that they could never be touched, was Circuit City. And about half the books around Circuit City. And then the second one was Fannie Mae. So when somebody reads these books, you say, well, why would somebody, be like that? Why would you say it's good when you can obviously see these companies failed? And it's a matter of the sort of drink the Kool-Aid, right? It's you want to believe it. So what Jim Collins did very well was he sat down and he thought, what is it that people would like to believe? And they would like to believe if you work hard, then everything will work out okay. You'd like to believe, if I keep my nose clean, pay attention to what I'm doing, and just work hard at what I'm doing, everything will work out fine, and I'll have a great success in the future. That's what we would like to believe. And our Judeo-Christian ethics lead us down that path, right? Be kind, be nice, do good things for the other people, and just mind your business and it'll all work out okay. Well, the reality is that that's just not true, right? It's a great thing to want to believe, but it's not how business works, because the world's an ever-changing place. And when the world changes, you become irrelevant if you don't change with it, right? The guy who did livery stables, he didn't have any business when cars came along. I always use this livery stable example because when I was a young man, the number one dominant form of television was Westerns. There were Westerns on every night of the week, I think. And now there's no Westerns on television at all. Well, why not? Because my parents were able to remember when people rode horses and buggies were in towns. And now the vast majority of people never sat on a horse in their entire life. And the vast majority of people, other than seeing a Western once every several years, don't really understand anything about a livery stable. And yet those were the number one people in most small towns for many, many years because you had to take care of the horses, but they lost relevancy. So this is what we're trying to attack in our coaching, is to sit down and say, if you go on your autopilot will tell you to be very careful about how you make decisions, always be very risk averse. So if you don't understand exactly how things are going to work out, if you don't understand the technology, then don't do anything. Delay, delay, delay. Wait until you're absolutely certain what your outcome is going to be. That's the path to failure, because when you're absolutely certain, it's too late to get in and you're already probably well on the way to death. You don't have an opportunity to change.
Yeah, Adam, I totally agree. And look, here are the companies that were in the Built to Last book, and I'm going to just read them all out, and we'll see how many of them are either relevant or even still around. Hewlett Packard, 3M, Motorola, Procter and Gamble, Merck, Nordstrom, Sony, Disney, Marriott, and Walmart.
Built to last, right?
Built to last. Yep, built to last. Where there's no, I mean, you'd expect, yeah, of course, they're still around. Some of these, Sony's still around, but is it really the powerhouse that it was 25 years ago?
All those companies are nowhere near the top of the relevancy chart. And the other big guru at the time was a guy named Tom Peters. He wrote a book called In Search of Excellence. And his thesis was, if you just constantly try to seek excellence at what you do, then the long term will work out on its own. And again, both of those sent you down the wrong road, because what happens is you can be really excellent at doing something nobody cares about. And in fact, these big companies, that's what goes wrong with them. They are trying very hard to be very excellent. And then what happens is then they get started focusing on earnings, and then they get into problems with quality control and other issues inside their companies. They start having problems with compliance and just doing the wrong thing. So let's take a minute now and turn and talk about somebody who got it right and did the right thing. And then that's Campbell. When I say Campbell's, you think
soup.
Of course you would, right? And so the reality is that, do you think you drink more Campbell soup now, or do you consume more Campbell soup now than you did 20 years ago? Or what do you think your consumption is?
Probably less, personally less.
Yeah, but not more, right?
Not more.
So the interesting thing about this is, here's some brands that are Campbell soup brands. How about Prego, the pasta sauce, Pace, the taco seasoning sauce, right? Swanson, the frozen dinners and stock. Pacific Foods, this will do stock and does pretzel chips, I think it is. And then there's V8 is their brand. And so they also have another bunch of brands. Listen to these. Kettle. Remember Kettle chips? Goldfish, the little fish crackers, right?
Yep, exactly.
Snyder's, pretzels and pretzel products. Pop Secret, popcorn. Lance, the little sandwich cracker things that you put in your lunches, right? Snack Factory. Cape Cod potato chips. Archway cookies. So the reason I bring this up is that people don't think of Campbell Soup that way. And what got my attention was they're changing their name to Campbell's. And I did some research on this, and I discovered that back around 2018, they made the decision that what they would do was sell the Campbell International business and the Campbell Fresh business. And they sold that to KKR. And they took the money and they bought Snyder's. So Snyder's, which is the pretzel company, it owned Lance, it owned Pop Secret, and it owned Kettle. And then they made the acquisition of Cape Cod. So what they did was they had this business, this soup business, right, and the Prego sauce business, but it wasn't growing. It wasn't going anywhere. And instead of continuing to invest in that and just blow it up going into foreign markets, they said, no, we're going to get out of that. That's a really low growth business. But we're going to keep the business in the United States as a cash producer to help us get into other businesses. So I took a look at what's happened to their revenues. And since in 2017, their revenues were about $6 billion, right? Today, they're $9.5 billion, over $9.5 billion 8 years later. So they've gone a third up. Now, it's not as good growth as maybe an Apple or a Meta, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Pretty solid,
Yeah. Now, here's the interesting thing. The soup business Back 8 years ago, it was a $2.4 billion business. Now it's a $2.6 billion business, flat, no growth. And so getting out of trying to continue to sell us more Campbell soup products or Campbell drinks or Campbell's V8 juice or something, that's probably not the road to growth. And in fact, the beverage business grew from $700 million to about $770 million. It's grown about 10% over the last 8 years. So that didn't have much growth in it, right? The Swanson TV dinners and the fast food stuff that they were in, the stocks and all that kind of stuff, that business has grown from about $1.1 billion to $1.2 billion. But when they shifted their resource allocation in 2018, they put their money into snacks. And now the snack business has gone from $1.6 billion to $5 billion.
Right. That's a really good case study because it shows that if they would have stayed on the same path, they would have been flat. But because they made that decision in 2018 to divest into, or actually invest, we shouldn't even say divest, to invest in the snack business, it shows clearly their growth.
I think it's both. See, that's what the thing about this, Manny, was they took part of the mothership, those other phrases we hear, right? Part of the core business, which was the Campbell's business internationally, and the fresh business, which was like a vegetable fresh business thing they had. They sold that. So here's this business they've had, and it's making money, but it doesn't grow. And they sold that, and they took the money and they invested it in a higher growth business, which was the snack business, right? And they kept putting their money into the snack business. So they didn't walk away from businesses that were producing cash, but they were very smart in terms of not allocating more money to it. I mean, I don't remember the last time I saw a Campbell soup ad, to be honest about it. I don't ever buy those products. I'm sure there are people who are. But the reality is that you weren't going to grow that brand, having, Campbell sandwiches or I don't know what you were going to do with it. But the net of it wasn't going anywhere. And V8 got the V8 splash going, and they've tried a lot of different stuff to get our attention. That really hasn't grown because you're up against, a whole shift in the beverage business where people, the consumption of soda like Coke and Pepsi is way off from where it was 10 years ago. And the people are going more to the Red Bulls and your energy drinks and a lot of your health food drinks, iced teas. The whole action has shifted. So what they did was, instead of chasing some of those markets, they said, what's the fastest growing market here? It was snacks. And so they kept these low growth businesses, don't fund them the way they used to, and they put their money into the snack business. And, I've got to be honest, I know what every single one of those snack products are. I shouldn't eat them. I try not to eat them, but some of them I do. I do think Cape Cod chips are good, and I think kettle chips are good. And so I try not to buy them, but if other people do, I have an irresistible urge to eat them. And I think a lot of us are that way, right? And we do more snacking at all ages, in our diets suffer for it, but it's where the market is. And that's the thesis that I think the people don't catch with us sometimes, is that what you do that can get you in trouble is over-investing in what you really know. There's that old Warren Buffett phrase, I don't invest in things I don't understand or I don't know. And that can get you into real trouble, right? You got to say, hey, I need to invest there because it's going to grow. So let's go learn. Let's figure it out. Let's get into the game. Let's figure out how we can be part of that and be excited to learn new stuff. Now, he did that. He learned new stuff and got into businesses he hadn't been in. So people misinterpret this and say, oh, if I don't know anything about that, I shouldn't invest in it. Well, no, maybe you shouldn't invest today, but you might want to invest tomorrow. And you better get up that learning curve in a hurry to figure out where you're going to invest. And that's the key to success. So what we do a lot of here is telling people, look, you need to stop investing in the stuff that isn't going to grow. You need to then take that money and invest it in things that are going to grow. Right. So, 10 years ago, I had a number of clients that were in higher education because people were shifting to online learning. And they were like, what am I going to do? I'm getting thrown out of business. It was like, well, I'm sorry, but quit investing in new professors, buildings, and all the stuff you do in a traditional college. Stop investing in that and start investing in online education. You may get by with some fewer tenured professors in order to get some young people who can come in to develop, online product that you could offer to students. It's that's the key. That's the sort of the gold that's inside the coaching we do, is being able to tell people you're on autopilot for where you're investing your time, where you're investing your money, where you're telling your people to spend their time. That's autopilot a lot of times, and you just have them very focused on what they've been doing and trying to do it better. And that's where you have to stop and say, wait a minute, I'm not getting much bang out of that buck.
No.
And so what I need to do is put that buck somewhere else.
Yes, and I think there's some nuance to that as well. The University of Arizona made an investment in an online platform about 4 or 5 years ago that actually ended up not being a good idea. But if you really start to peel back the layers of why it didn't work out, first of all, that other organization, the growth is flat. And what really, when I started talking to some of the people, the players that made these decisions, what it came down to is a little bit of what you're talking about right now, Adam, but it isn't fully put out there, is that they just put their toe in. And sometimes you got to go more than a toe. You got to put the whole damn leg in. And so this is some of the nuance that we can talk you through as your coach, as that outside perspective. We're going to ask some tough questions, and it's really a matter of, are you ready to really take these questions, answer them? And then when we figure something out, are you really willing and ready to put your whole leg in and perhaps even dive all the way in?
I mean, look at Walmart. They bought Jet, but how big are they in electronic commerce? Well, nowhere near where they ought to be, right? And that's because they just can't let go of the stores. They just can't vision themselves being an Amazon with running through distribution centers and very few stores. And that's what killed Blockbuster. Blockbuster had all those stores. Along came Netflix. They're distributing the DVDs to your house through the mail, and it's much lower cost, and customers really liked it. But the guys running Wayne Huizenga, the guy running Blockbuster, he just couldn't see his way to go in and buy Netflix, even though it was available to him. He said, no, it'll dilute my earnings. I don't want to do that. Reality was that he needed to, about 5 years after Netflix was started, he needed to close half the stores. He just needed to walk away. He was way overstored at that point. Clearly, the Netflix model was going to grow, and he should have taken the money and put it in Netflix. And if they couldn't get the investors to understand it in 1 year, they would have understood it in a couple years. But instead of doing that, he stuck with the business he had, and 4 years after that, he was broke. He was bankrupt. Right. And of course, there are no Blockbuster stores anymore around. And that's where we got the point of the podcast, folks. One of the podcasts is, if you keep doing what you've always done and you focus on your internally on improvements, and then you get really focused on earnings instead of revenues, you're going to end up like Boeing and Intel and Walgreens and Red Lobster and Pizza Hut. And, this list that just keeps getting longer and longer.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead, what you have to start saying is, I have to allocate a lot more time listening to my customers and looking at the world around me and figuring out where the growth is, and then putting your money where your growth is, like Campbell Soup did. Get rid of half. I don't think it was really half. I think it was more like a third of their business that was offshore, the core business, but get rid of it and then put the money in something maybe we don't know, snack foods. But snacks are growing, so let's get in that game and let's figure out how we can make more money at it. And like I said, that's tripled in size in the last 8 years. And that's the role that you need to take as a leader today, even if you're in a small company, is you got to be willing to let go of the past in order to create the future that'll make you a long-lasting company. Yeah,
very well said. Sounds like it's all about following trends, and some of that, well, all of that is what we talk about at Spark Partners, and there's a lot of nuance to it. And so I always invite our audience to reach out to us at manny@sparkpartners.com or adam@sparkpartners.com. We can walk you through these things. We can help you to be in that different position to look at what's happening in the world, what's happening with trends, and of course, map out what's happening in your own organization and what kind of decisions are you going to make to reallocate resources and shift into that new mindset. Market shift, of course, is a huge buzzword we talk about. And with that, Adam, we'll sign off for today. Any final thoughts?
I want some kettle chips.
Very well said, Adam. With that, we'll talk with you next week.
Thank you.